I've been working on this project for the past few weeks, and I think it provides a great opportunity to show you how an architect works behind closed doors, or at the very least, how I do. You see, this project is only a stone throw away from my office, and it's a decent scale because I'm asked to design a multi-residential building and a single-family house, all in the same project. I'm Pedro. I'm a licensed architect working here in Brussels, Belgium, well, just off Brussels, and I specialize in sustainable environmental design. I analyzed the site in question in a previous video, so today we're going deeper and I'm going to be showing to you how I approach the schematic design or the preliminary design. At this stage, I like to keep things loose. Now, don't get me wrong, we're still going to be working with constraints. What I had to do at this stage is understand the impact those constraints will have upon my design. So what I like to do when I'm approaching a new build project like this one is work with volumes and keeping things rather simple. So the idea is to take the limitations I identified in my previous video, so in the site analysis, and make sure I know exactly what I can and what I can't play with. This doesn't necessarily mean I have to go wild everywhere, and it certainly doesn't mean that all my ideas are good. As you will see, don't worry, I will show you everything. The point for now is to explore options and go from a general sense down to a more specific one. You see, as we go through the different stages of a project, from schematic design or site analysis all the way to delivering a project, the project becomes very fixed. It loses its malleability, and that's a given, that's understandable. As it goes from paper to brickwork, you simply cannot move walls anymore. That's easy to understand. But it also happens at the design stage. When I'm designing at this early stage, it's easy to try out and test different ideas. I won't know the exact cost of one idea versus another one, but I will get a sense of which idea is working better. Let me give you another example. If later on in the project I want to change a wall, for instance, or change the layout of an apartment, that could probably have massive implications because the structural engineer and the HVAC engineer have already worked behind me, and now they all have to work again, and that quickly brings tension into a project, not to mention extra costs in terms of resources, and that can certainly be time and most likely money as well. In order to avoid that, we need to explore our options now at the schematic design phase. So how do we design and move forward, all keeping things rather loose? Well, that actually depends a lot on the scale of the project and how the architect works. You see, not too long ago, I posted another video where I was drawing layout plans for a client, and at that point, for that project, I was also doing the preliminary design phase. But that project had a lot of constraints that this project simply doesn't have. It was a different scale. It was a renovation of a house in Brussels. This one is a new build. So you can see that the limitations are just vastly different, and the way to approach each project changes. What I want to get at is that we architects don't approach projects all the same. It varies from one architect to the other, and also it varies from one project to the other within the same architect, such as myself. So for this particular project, rather than working on a 2D medium, which is drafting out plans on sections and ideas, I'm going to be working on 3D models and volumes, because I think this will give me more tools to explore my options. So I'm going to be playing with masses and keeping them simple, because I don't want to delve too much into which construction method I'm going to be using or which materials. These are all important questions as well, which I'm going to be resolving as we move on forward. But in this case, limitations also apply. The construction method, I think, is going to be chosen with the client based on the economic constraints. And the overall materials of the facade, well, the palette is quite restricted because of the building legislation here in the council. So what I want to know now is basically how much I can build and how that is going to be affecting the immediate surroundings, the neighbors. Also not it. And for that, as you may have guessed, 3D models are just ideal. But before I go into all that more exciting stuff, I have to make a stop, and this is probably when I lose half of you, and talk to you about building in Belgium. And therein lies my challenge. How do I keep this light and good humored while talking to you about building legislation? So I'm gonna do my best, and I promise to keep this short. But we have to cover this basis so that the rest of the video can make sense. So let's throw a progress bar down here and let's go. The reality is I love Belgium. This country has taken me in. This is where I chose to grow my family, so I'm quite grateful to it. So much so that I only celebrated a little bit when Wayne scored that goal against them in the World Cup. Now, I hope I don't get too much hate because of that. But joking aside, in terms of building legislation, it's quite complicated actually. Like one would imagine, there are several layers of building legislation. There are at a national level, which are the civil codes, then at a federal level, and then you go all the way down to a local and community level. Now, these final ones are more guidelines than real building legislation. But if you don't follow these guidelines, your project can very easily be knocked down. So up to now, all good. That makes sense and it's perfect. The problem is that in the legislation, or at least in the guidelines, you have a clause that says that a project has to be harmoniously integrated within its urban environment. That is the main problem, because at the end of the day, it is the civil servant that decides if the project fits or not its urban environment. But this is, as you would imagine, a very subjective clause. The problem is then compounded by the fact that you simply cannot follow all of the legislation and the guidelines. Most often than not, these contradict one another. Unusual plots simply do not allow for normal rules to be applied to them. It's just the way it is. This makes it easy for the council or the civil servant to find clauses that haven't been respected simply because you weren't able to in the beginning and knock your project down. Now, I'm not saying that this is what they do. I've never had a problem with a council or anything. I'm just pointing out these instances which are complicated and will affect this particular project. One final thing I should say about this is that one can appeal to the decision of the civil servant, but that this becomes a tedious process where no one really wants to be implicated in that. Neither the council, nor my clients, and definitely not me. So, what are the implications of what I just said within this particular project? Well, here we want to build as much as possible. The more we build, the more profit my client gets. It's not only that, to be fair to my client, because this project is located in the center of town, only a 2-minute walk from the city council or the church. So it's really prime location for this town. And I believe that it is more sustainable to densify our urban centers than it is to allow urban sprawl to do that, to sprawl out into the environment and the surroundings, into areas which are not served by public transports, utilities, and so on. So on this one, I'm on the side of my client. And all this, to be fair, I knew before signing the contract with my client. I knew we were going to be having discrepancies with the council, which would like us to build less, and I would like to build more. But I signed this project regardless, not because I wanted to go against them, because I rather like my council, but because I understand my client's position and I want to defend it, not only for his profit, but also because I think everybody benefits from that. Of course, I'm also aware that we're building in a very narrow street, as you can see in this footage. That's the street where the project is located. This is taken from the corner of the church. So I'm not suggesting to build a skyscraper here, but I'm going back to the implications of what I said about the legislation. Normally, the guidelines allow me to build up to a height of 8.5 meters. However, both my neighbors are below this height. So if I build that much, I'm pretty sure the council is not going to approve my building demand. So now the question remains, okay, what is the height I can actually build up to? And this is where the 3D models come in handy. Now, if I were to take the easy road out I would build a project which is similar to this. That would be 3 row houses all attached to the other. I wouldn't give a second thought to the windows on the party wall. I would just force that neighbor to close them up and put parking spaces on the ground floor. But this, I believe, is not the way to go. And the worst part of this is that I'm proposing to the ground floor the opposite of a vibrant urban environment. I understand I'm only doing a residential project, but I'm certain I can offer something better than parking spaces on the ground floor. So we're definitely not going to do this option, because this would be the worst way to go. So all my other proposals accommodate, to an extent, my neighbor's windows. I'm creating a setback on the first 2 levels, and I'm creating a terrace on the final level. In all my experiments, I'm always working with a gable roof, because the legislation asks me to do so. I actually have to respect the slope of my neighbor's roof, which is 43 degrees. I want to keep my volume simple, but I'm not too happy with the way I'm reaching my other neighbor. I think this could be improved upon. I like these vertical elements because I want to frame that entrance to my building, and I think it adds some dynamism. But again, I think it's a bit sloppy still as a solution, and I think I could do better. I also find that my volume becomes massive, especially when I set it in its urban environment, in the overall model. I see that my roof is just coming too high, and that's a consequence of following the guidelines, unfortunately. I can build up to 12 meters deep, my main volume, and since I have a more or less 45-degree angled roof, the total height of my roof will be an additional 6 meters. That's quite massive. So I tried bringing it down and cutting that part off. That could actually help us to place all the installation equipment that we need to place on the outside, so that we don't have to put it on the garden. But again, I still think it's a bit of a sloppy solution. I'm not too happy with this solution either, so I kept on working at it. Then I came to this third solution, where I'm simplifying the object, and I'm having an object work more or less like a plinth, and then the roof be another mass which intersects with this plinth, and they're all joined by these vertical elements. I want to draw inspiration for these vertical elements from what I see happening up on the main street. And the main street is a few minutes walk from there, and I started to be quite happy with the solution. So with that, my client and I went and had a discussion with the council so that they could see where we stood and we could get a glimpse of their reaction. Now, we did not get a definite answer from the council coming out of this meeting, but the architect there did point out, correctly I might add, that this vertical gesture might be intimidating for the houses just across the narrow street. Furthermore, this doesn't really happen in this small street. And as I just said, I think she's right. The other thing that we did gather from this initial meeting with the council is that they're not at all happy with the idea of us proposing a detached house further back in the plot. They're saying that nowhere in town is it allowed to build inside the plot. However, this is not how we see it. I think that this plot can have its own independent pedestrian access further down the road, as you can see here. So it's not like we're building a house inside the plot. I know I didn't show any volume studies of the house, but that's because for the house, what is important, at least in my understanding of the project, is the location of this house. I know how many square meters my client asked me to build. I know I have to build at least 2 levels because that's what the council wants. So ground plus 1. So I know what the footprint of my house is going to be. So now what I wanted to do was decide where this house was going to be located. And I set it back here because I think that does the less harm to both my neighbors who are going to be most impacted by this house. The most important repercussions I see happening are to my neighbor further south, because my house is going to have a view onto this one for sure. And I'm sure that the council is going to object to my client's house precisely because of this fact. That's why I'm trying to limit the views my new house will have upon my neighbor. So I'm placing it here because then I will have a view only onto the more public front yard of my neighbor and not his backyard, which I want to preserve for his privacy. Now, similarly, for my other neighbor, which is next door, I didn't want the house to be seen from his living room. That way, I don't have this neighbor be against us in our new project, because I know that the council will consider strongly the neighbors' opinions. That's why I'm trying to accommodate everyone with this project. Not only because I'm a good guy. I didn't bother too much with volumetric studies for the house because I think the house will come down to a hard yes, you can build it, or no, you can't build it. Unlike the multi-residential project to the street, which will be more a question of, okay, you can build it, but if it is of a certain manner, or if it doesn't impact so much neighbors, or that kind of thing. So upon leaving the meeting with the council, I came back to my office and I applied the comments from the local architects, and I really like this new solution. I'm really thinking it's starting to look rather nice. I like the simplicity of it. Nevertheless, as much as I like the simplicity, I think that the entrance still needs some sort of framing. And that is why I broke down the plinth into 2 volumes holding the roof volume. What I particularly like about this solution is that now my building starts to seem smaller and not as tall, because the roof volume is slightly set back, so you won't really see the gutter or the cornice or anything, which will, I think, lower the scale. I know I mentioned at the top of the video that I was going to show you how architects work behind closed doors, but I'm sorry if I have been misleading, because as you can see, there is no one process fits all. This process I took for this project is not the process I would take for a renovation of some sort. The reality is, we architects approach projects, or at least I approach projects very, very differently. And my approach now, not finishing this phase yet, will actually be to go and see my neighbors with my volume, with my project, and seeing how they react. And that's exactly what I think I'm going to be doing next. So stay tuned for the reaction.